The vast silence of deep space was shattered by a single, desperate signal. A pulse of light and data, repeating endlessly into the void, bouncing from ancient relay stations that hadn't seen use in centuries. It was the kind of signal civilizations learned to ignore, a final futile scream from a dying world. Yet this time, someone was listening. Aboard the TSS Revenant, a Terran Vanguard warship stationed on the fringes of known space, the signal came through as a priority alert. Commander. Elias Voss stood at the bridge, his arms crossed as the audio played. The voice was broken, filled with static, but the message was unmistakable. This is static. Colony Tarkis 5. Please, for the love of the stars, someone help us. They're taking our people, killing everything. Static. We have no weapons. No way to fight. Static. Anyone out there? Please. Then, silence. Voss's sharp eyes flickered toward the holomap, where a red marker blinked over a world that should have been unremarkable. A small colony, barely self-sustaining, sitting on the outskirts of an abandoned sector. No strategic value, no military installations, no reason for an attack. But someone had attacked them. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mira Kyle, leaned over the console, scanning the data. Multiple distress pings over the last 48 hours, she muttered. No responses, no reinforcements. Just ignored, Voss exhaled sharply. It was common enough. The galactic powers had long since stopped answering every cry for help. Most factions only acted when there was something to gain. Resources, alliances, power. The Terran Vanguard, however, lived by a different creed. No cry for help goes unanswered. Who's responsible? Voss asked. A moment later, the answer came. Mira's expression darkened. Cross-referencing attack signatures with known fleets. Sir, this isn't some pirate raid. It's the Khazar Dominion. The bridge fell silent. Even the lowest-ranked officers stiffened at the name. The Khazar Dominion, one of the most feared empires in the known galaxy. A warlike species, ruthless in conquest, driven by a philosophy of absolute dominance. They did not raid. They did not take prisoners. They erased. For a moment, even Voss hesitated. The Vanguard had fought the Khazar before, and each encounter had been brutal, costly, and unforgiving. They were the kind of enemy no one challenged lightly. But then he looked back at the holomap, at the blinking distress beacon, the final breath of an innocent world begging for aid. He turned to his crew. His voice was calm, but absolute. We're going. Mira nodded, not even waiting for confirmation. I'll signal the fleet. We can mobilize in 30 minutes. Another officer hesitated. Sir, this could mean war with the Khazar. They already made that choice, Voss said. Now, we make ours. With that, the Terran Vanguard fleet moved out. Hours later, approaching Tarkis 5 the moment the fleet dropped out of FTL, the horror became clear. Tarkis 5 was burning. On the planet's surface, blackened craters and smoldering ruins stretched as far as the eye could see. Cities lay in ruin, entire districts turned to ash. Smoke and debris swirled in the upper atmosphere, the remnants of orbital defenses shattered in mere moments. But what truly set the blood cold was the absence of any enemy presence. The Khazar were gone. Voss clenched his jaw as the fleet moved into position. His instincts screamed that something wasn't right. Deploy recon teams. I want survivors found and a full tactical analysis. As dropships descended, they found them. Huddled clusters of survivors, mostly alien refugees, who had settled on the colony. Their faces were hollow, their eyes wide with disbelief. They hadn't expected anyone to come. Voss stepped forward as an elderly Tarkian woman struggled to her feet, staring at the human warriors before her. You actually came, she whispered. Voss nodded. Tell me what happened. She trembled. They came from the sky. No warning, no demands. They just descended upon us like beasts. Her voice cracked. They took people. Not just humans, all of us. They took our children, our elders, our strongest. Voss exchanged a glance with Mira. The Khazar didn't take prisoners. Why start now? Then, an alert flashed across his comms. Commander, we found something. Voss and his team rushed to an excavation site at the colony's outskirts. The dig site was ancient, its walls marked with symbols older than recorded history. But the artifact it once held was gone. The scientist in charge, a disheveled human named Dr. Hallstrom, looked at Voss with barely restrained panic. They took it! What? Voss demanded. Took what? The artifact, Hallstrom gasped. We barely started deciphering it, but it was a prison. Silence fell. What kind of prison? Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hallstrom swallowed hard. One that was never meant to be opened. At that moment, the Vanguard intercepted a transmission, a deep, guttural voice filled with something that sounded disturbingly close to amusement. You were warned to stay out of this, Terran. You do not understand what you have just interfered with. Turn back now, or face the wrath of something older than the stars. The message cut out. A deep, cold weight settled in Voss's gut. The Khazar weren't just raiding this colony. They were trying to awaken something, and they had succeeded. His gaze hardened as he turned to his officers. Get the fleet ready, he ordered. We're going after them. The hunt had begun. The ruins of Tarkus V were more than just remnants of a slaughter. They were a warning. The air itself carried the scent of burnt structures, the acrid taste of destruction clinging to every breath. Twisted metal and shattered stone lay strewn across the once thriving colony, and what little remained of its people told a story of terror beyond comprehension. Voss stood at the center of the devastation, his boots pressing into scorched soil. His eyes moved from the ruins to the broken survivors that had gathered near the landing zones, trembling under the flickering glow of emergency beacons. The dead far outnumbered the living. Those who had survived had only done so by hiding like rats buried beneath the rubble, whispering prayers to a sky that had forsaken them. One of them, a young woman, stepped forward. Her hands were bruised and covered in dried blood, her face gaunt from exhaustion. She barely had the strength to speak, but when she did, her voice was hollow. They took them. My son, my husband. They didn't even fight. They just... She swallowed hard. They just vanished into the sky. Voss clenched his jaw, listening intently. Around him, his officers gathered as more survivors were brought in. Each had the same story. The Khazar had descended from the stars in a wave of fire, but they had not come simply to kill. They had rounded up entire groups, men, women, children, without distinction. No one knew why. No one knew where they had been taken. That, more than anything, disturbed Voss. The Khazar were conquerors, not slavers. In every recorded battle against them, they had never bothered with prisoners. To them, those who fell to their might were not worthy of life. Yet something had changed. Mira, standing beside him, had noticed the same thing. They weren't here to destroy this world, she murmured, scanning the destruction. They were looking for something specific. Voss nodded, his gaze shifting to Dr. Hallstrom, the archaeologist who had sent the distress signal long after the attack had begun. The scientist had barely stopped shaking since they found him. Now, under the weight of Voss's stare, he gathered himself enough to speak. They took the artifact. Silence fell over the group. Only the distant sound of crackling flames and the moans of the wounded broke it. Voss's expression darkened. Explain. Hallstrom exhaled shakily, wiping sweat from his brow. The colony's leaders didn't even know it existed. It was buried deep, thousands of years deep. We only found it by accident a few months ago. At first, we thought it was just another relic from some forgotten civilization. But as we started to study it, we realized... He hesitated, glancing around, as if afraid to say the words aloud. Realized what? Mira pressed. Hallstrom swallowed. It wasn't just old. It was wrong. The structure, the inscriptions. It didn't match any known civilization, not even the precursors. His voice dropped to a whisper. And it was sealed. Voss's stomach twisted. Sealed how? Think of it like a tomb, Hallstrom said. Not built to protect what was inside, but to keep it locked away. A cold silence settled over them. Voss turned his gaze toward the shattered remains of the excavation site, the gaping hole in the earth where the artifact had been ripped free. The Khazar had taken it, and that meant his comm unit crackled to life. "Commander," came the voice of a recon officer, "you need to see this." Minutes later, Voss and his team stood over a corpse, but it wasn't human. The body was tall, almost skeletal, wrapped in ancient armor that had long since rusted. Its face was barely recognizable. A long, elongated skull with deep-set eyes that had long since gone dark. The remains were so ancient that it was impossible to determine its original form. Hallstrom knelt beside it, brushing dirt away. "This isn't a colonist, and it's not Khazar." He took a slow breath. "This is something else entirely." Voss studied the corpse with grim suspicion. The armor bore no insignia, no markings that tied it to any known civilization. But the weapons. One of his officers lifted a fragment of a blade. Even in death, the metal gleamed with an eerie, almost unnatural glow. A design that was neither functional nor ceremonial. It was something else, something old. Then the second discovery came. Further down in the ruins, another excavation team uncovered something far more terrifying. Buried beneath the rubble of the colony's central structure was a massive door, partially destroyed, with markings that resembled the ones on the ancient corpse's armor. It had been sealed, and then pried open. Hallstrom stood over it, staring into the black abyss beyond. His voice trembled. "They opened it." Mira exhaled sharply. "If they took something from this place? What if it wasn't just a relic? What if it was a prisoner?" Voss's expression turned to steel. He had spent his entire career facing threats across the galaxy. But there was something about this discovery that felt different. And then came the transmission. The Vanguard fleet, still in orbit, intercepted an unauthorized broadcast. It wasn't from the Khazar. It wasn't from the colony. It was from deep space. A voice, ancient and filled with a resonance that sent shivers down the spine, echoed through the fleet's comms. "The chains are broken." A pause. "We are free." The message ended. Voss stood frozen for a moment before turning sharply to his crew. "Get everyone back to the ships. Now." The officers moved without question, but even as they did, Voss knew they were already too late. Something had awakened, and the Khazar had taken it with them. The return to the Vanguard was swift, but the unease lingered in the air like static before a storm. Voss stood on the bridge, staring at the fleet's tactical display. The Khazar warships had vanished into deep space, their trajectory unclear, but their purpose now undeniable. They hadn't just raided Tarkus 5, they had retrieved something they shouldn't have. "Status on the distress signal?" Voss asked, eyes locked on the swirling void beyond the viewport. Mira, working the comms, shook her head. "No response yet. We relayed it to every allied system in range, but even the Terran High Command is being slow to acknowledge. They don't understand the urgency." Voss exhaled sharply. Bureaucrats, politicians. They would demand reports, investigations, formal confirmations before committing a single warship to action. By the time they realized what was at stake, the universe could already be burning. He turned to his fleet's tactical officer. "Did we track their exact jump coordinates?" The officer hesitated. "We got a rough vector, but nothing precise. Their ships were running high-energy drives. We'd need to extrapolate based on their past engagements and known operational sectors. Then do it." Voss's voice was firm. "We can't sit and wait." Mira looked up from her console. "Sir, if we go after them alone, we don't have a choice." Voss turned back to the bridge crew, his expression like carved steel. "The Khazar are warriors, but they aren't reckless. They knew exactly what they were looking for. They took the artifact, but the way they moved, the precision of the strike, it wasn't just about conquest, it was retrieval." Hallstrom, standing nearby, swallowed hard. "Commander, if they retrieved something that was meant to stay sealed—" "They didn't retrieve it," Voss cut in. "They unleashed it." The bridge fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of realization settled over them like cold iron. The Khazar had taken something from a tomb that wasn't meant to be disturbed. Now they were gone, disappearing into the depths of space, with a stolen nightmare in their grasp. Then the alarms went off. Massive energy spike detected. Deep space, bearing 211 Mark IV. The sensor officer's voice carried the edge of panic. "It's coming from beyond the Perseus Rift." The star map lit up, and every officer on the bridge turned to look. A single pulse of raw energy had just erupted from an otherwise dead sector of the galaxy. The intensity of the reading was staggering. No natural phenomenon could produce something so deliberate. Voss's mind raced. The Khazar had fled in that direction, and something had answered. A cold certainty settled in his gut. "Set course. Immediately," Mira hesitated. "Sir, we don't know what we're flying into." Voss's voice was a razor's edge. "That's exactly why we have to go." The orders went out, and within moments the fleet moved. Engines roared to life, and the Vanguard led the charge, piercing through space as the jump drive spun up. The coordinates were locked, the mission clear. They were going to find out what the Khazar had woken up. And if it was what Voss feared, they would have to put it back to sleep. The Vanguard and its accompanying fleet tore through the void, the slipstream drive humming with a steady pulse as they pushed toward the last known trajectory of the Khazar. The bridge was silent except for the quiet beeping of tactical readouts and the occasional murmur of status updates. Every officer, every soldier on board, felt the same thing. An unease that coiled in their stomachs like a cold serpent. Voss stood at the command deck, his hands gripping the railing as the stars outside twisted into streaks of light. He could feel it, the weight of something unseen pressing against the edges of reality. The Khazar had taken something from a tomb that had been sealed for millennia. And now, a cosmic ripple had begun. Mira's voice cut through the silence. "Coming. Up on exit point in 10 seconds. A faint tremor passed through the deck as the slipstream drive disengaged. The familiar sensation of returning to real space washed over them. Momentary disorientation, then stillness. The stars snapped back into fixed points, and then the wreckage appeared. Hundreds of miles wide, an entire Khazar fleet lay in ruin before them. Twisted metal drifted in the abyss, shattered hulls torn apart by a force unlike any weapon known to humanity. Some ships were cracked open as if a massive hand had reached in and peeled them apart like fruit. Others were simply missing pieces, their forms scooped out with unnatural precision. Mira whispered, "My God." Hallstrom was already working the sensors. "No life signs. The entire fleet is gone." Voss didn't respond. His eyes swept the field of devastation, searching. The Khazar were warriors feared across the galaxy. They had survived against Terran forces, against galactic coalitions, and had never lost a fleet this size in a single engagement. Yet here, they were destroyed. Mira's fingers flew over the controls. "I'm picking up a power signature, something still active out there." On the screen, a signal pulsed from the center of the wreckage. It wasn't Khazar technology. It wasn't Terran. It wasn't anything they recognized. Voss made his decision instantly. "Send a probe. Full spectrum scan. I want to know what's still alive out there." The bridge fell into tense silence as the probe launched, slipping between the debris field, its cameras and sensors feeding data directly back to them. For the first few moments, there was nothing but ruin. Torn bodies drifted in the dark. The Khazar's most powerful warships, ripped apart like paper in a storm. Then the feed glitched. Mira's hands flew to the controls. "We're losing signal. Something's interfering." A shadow moved in the wreckage, a tall, impossible figure. And then, the probe cut out. Every screen on the bridge went black. Every console flickered off. Every system failed. Then, in the dead silence, a single transmission forced its way through. The comms. It wasn't human. It wasn't Khazar. It was ancient, layered. A voice that was more than a voice. And it only spoke 4 words. "You should not have come." The bridge erupted in chaos. Lights flickered back online. Systems rebooted. The fleet's sensors snapped back to life and detected movement. Something was coming. Not a fleet. Not a ship. Something else. Voss's voice was calm, controlled but cold. All hands, battle stations. The crew obeyed instantly. They didn't know what was coming, but whatever had erased the Khazar fleet was about to turn its eyes on them. The air on the Vanguard's bridge was thick with tension, every crew member locked in a stunned silence. That voice, those words, hadn't been a simple transmission. They had felt it, inside their minds. Mira's hands were trembling as she rerouted power to the long-range sensors. I don't understand. That wasn't just interference. It was, like, something forced its way into the systems. Hallstrom's voice was rough. Into the systems? No. That thing spoke inside my head. I heard it. Not with my ears, with my damn bones. Across the fleet, ships reported the same thing. Every officer, every soldier, every AI had heard the same voice. You should not have come. And now something was moving toward them. Voss's mind raced. He had fought the Khazar, had stood against fleets of superior numbers, had survived when survival wasn't an option. But this was not war. This was something else. Give me a visual. The screens flickered. The long-range cameras adjusted, focusing on the shifting mass beyond the wreckage. And then they saw it. A shadow in space, black against black. Something that absorbed light rather than reflected it. It was huge, larger than a dreadnought, yet it didn't move like a ship. No engines, no drive signatures, just presence. And it was watching them. Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. It's alive, Voss's jaw clenched. Of course it was. A ripple passed through the thing's form, like a liquid shadow shifting in the void. And then, the stars behind it disappeared. Not because it moved, because it expanded, like a horizon opening its mouth. A pulse erupted through the void. Something deep, something primal. Every ship in the fleet shuddered as their systems dimmed. Power flickered. Hull plating groaned as if being pulled in two directions at once. Then the screaming started. Not over comms, not through any known frequency. Inside, their minds. Every soldier, every officer, hearing voices that weren't theirs, seeing things that weren't real. Flashes of ruined civilizations, of stars collapsing, of entire species crying out in agony before being swallowed by darkness. This was not an attack. This was a warning. And then, a single Khazar warship came back online. A broken, limping thing. Its hull barely intact, power surging erratically through its shattered frame. Somehow, it was still alive. And it was broadcasting a message in Khazar battle code. Voss ordered it on screen immediately. The display crackled. To life, faint, distorted visuals appearing through waves of static. The Khazar commander was barely recognizable. His armor was scorched. His breathing was ragged. And his eyes, once filled with the burning fury of his warrior race, were now wide with terror. He was weeping. A Khazar warlord, a general of their most feared fleet, weeping. His voice was hoarse, raw from screaming. We broke the seal. We took what was buried, and now it wakes. You must run. You must. The transmission cut. The ship detonated, its core rupturing in an instant. Voss barely had time to react before the darkness. Moved, not fast, not aggressive, just inevitable. Like an ocean tide. Orders, sir? Hallstrom's voice snapped through the horror. Voss knew what the Khazar had done. They had disturbed something ancient, something that should never have been woken. And now, it was stirring. His decision was made. All ships, reverse course, now, full retreat. Do not engage. But as the fleet turned, the black tide continued to spread. And in the depth of the void, something was watching. Something older than war. Something more patient than time. And it was waiting. The Vanguard's engines roared as the fleet executed emergency maneuvers. Every ship, every captain, every officer had one thought burned into their minds: escape. But the void had changed. The laws of space itself no longer applied. It wasn't just darkness now. It was a presence, stretching beyond known physics, twisting, The fabric of reality. The fleet moved, engines at maximum burn, but something was wrong. Mira's hands flew over the sensors, sweat beading on her forehead. "Sir, we're moving at full speed, but—" She turned, face pale. "We're not getting any farther away." Voss's stomach twisted. He checked the nav data himself. She wasn't wrong. The fleet's speed was unchanged, but the distance to the anomaly wasn't increasing, like they were caught in the gravity of something without mass. Hallstrom's voice was sharp. "This is impossible! We should be pulling away!" A tremor ran through the ship. Not from weapons fire, not from impact, from something deeper. Then, the long-range sensors detected movement. Not from the fleet, from beyond it. Something immense. Something shifting inside the black veil. The crew felt it before they saw it. The space around them bent. Time stuttered. Moments stretched too long, and then snapped back too fast. And then, the stars disappeared. Not just blacked out, not hidden. Gone. The ship's external cameras flickered, struggling to process the impossible. Where the stars had once been, where light had once stretched across the infinite cosmos, there was now only absence. It wasn't darkness. It was less than darkness. A nothingness so complete that the human mind rejected it. And inside that absence, things moved. Voss felt his breath hitch. They weren't alone. Something older than war. Something beyond death. Then, through the absolute void, a sound resonated through the hull. A whisper, not in the ears, but in the bones. "Why do you run?" The voice was layered, vast, like a chorus of countless voices stacked over eons. "You carry their scent." Mira's fingers dug into her console. "Scent? What scent?" "The ones who broke the seal. The ones who dared to wake us." Hallstrom's hand hovered over the weapon systems. "They're talking about the Khazar." Voss exhaled sharply. Of course. The Khazar started this. And now, humanity was caught in the wake of their mistake. Voss stepped forward, keeping his voice steady. "We are not them. We came because of a distress call." For a moment there was silence. Then the whisper returned. Closer. The foolish ones cried for help as they were unmade. "And now, so do you," the comm screamed. A signal burst from the anomaly, slamming into the fleet's systems like a tidal wave. Every ship's AI went silent. Every crew member's vision blurred. For an instant, they were somewhere else. A place without form. A place without light. And in that place, they saw ruins. Galaxies burned hollow. Echoes of battles fought against things that had no names. This was not war. This was erasure. And then they were back. The bridge was in chaos. Some crew members gasped for breath. Others clutched their heads, their eyes wide with unspeakable knowledge. Voss's knuckles were white as he gripped the console. "All ships prepare for faster-than-light jump." Mira hesitated. "Sir, if we—" Now, every ship in the fleet powered its jump drives, but something else moved first. A shape, not a ship, emerged from the void. Not one. Many. They weren't solid. They weren't shadows. They were wounds in the fabric of space itself. And they were awakening. One of the fleet's destroyers, the Resolute, fired its engines at full burn, trying to break free. It didn't get far. The moment its bow touched the darkness, the ship froze. Not stopped. Not halted. Frozen in time. Every molecule, every atom, suspended in the moment before destruction. And then, it shattered. Not in an explosion, not in fire, but like glass dropped into eternity. Voss watched in horror. "Jump, now!" The fleet's drives activated. Light ripped through the void, and the vanguard escaped. But as they fell away into the stars, Voss saw it. The black expanse, the wounds in reality, and the things inside it. They had seen humanity now, and they would not forget. The vanguard emerged from FTL with a violent lurch, the entire fleet spilling out into normal space like survivors from a burning wreck. The ship's hull groaned, its systems flickering as reality stabilized around them. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. Then Mira's voice broke the silence. "Confirming, we made it." Voss exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. The damage had been done. The fleet's ranks were thinner. Some ships hadn't made it. Others limped, their hulls bearing scars from something beyond weapons fire. Hallstrom scanned the readouts. 5 ships lost, 7 crippled. He paused, eyes dark. The Resolute never jumped. Voss didn't respond. He already knew, and the worst part? They had no idea if those left behind were truly dead, or if they were now trapped in some frozen moment, like a scream never finished, lost in the abyss forever. Silence stretched across the bridge, heavy and suffocating. The crew felt it. This was not a victory. It was survival. Nothing more. Mira's hands trembled over the sensors. "Sir, that thing, those things, what were they?" No one answered. No one could. And that's when the distress beacon pinged. Again, a cold, shrill noise cutting through the silence. The same signal. Voss turned slowly toward the display. "That's not possible!" Mira's fingers flew across the console. "It's coming from the same location, from the anomaly." A fresh wave of unease passed through the crew. How? They had seen the source. The Khazar were gone, consumed, erased. Nothing remained. And yet, the beacon pulsed again. And this time it came with something new. A voice, a message in a language that had no origin. No known speakers, a voice that spoke without sound. More will come. The whisper slithered through the ship's comms, untraceable, resonating from within the hull itself. They always come. Mira's breathing hitched. "Sir, I..." She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something Voss had never seen in her before. Fear. Then the ship's systems dimmed, not just the lights. Everything. As if something unseen had reached inside the ship. As if something was watching. Voss straightened, his hands clenched. "Cut the signal." Mira moved fast, fingers flying over controls. Trying. The whisper didn't stop. "You will not be the last." Then, the ship's power snapped back. Everything came online in an instant. The silence that followed was worse than the voice. Voss turned to Mira. "Did we transmit anything back?" She checked the logs. Then, her face went pale. "Sir," she swallowed hard. "Something used our relay." The implications crashed, down on them all at once. Whatever was inside that anomaly had sent something out. Not to them, beyond them, across the galaxy. To others. Voss's voice was grim. "Where?" Mira's screen flickered. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Everywhere. A long, awful silence filled the bridge. Then Hallstrom turned, his voice heavy. "What did we just wake up?" No one had an answer. Because somewhere, out in the void, something had heard the call. And now, it was coming.